What if I told you that everything you've been taught about winning is completely wrong? That the reason you're not dominating in business, relationships, fitness, or any area of life isn't because you're not talented enough, smart enough, or lucky enough, but because you're playing the game with a broken rule book. Most people approach competition like amateurs. They focus on the outcome, obsess over their opponents, and rely on motivation and hope. But real winners, the people who dominate consistently across multiple areas of life, they operate from a completely different playbook. They understand that winning isn't about being the best on any given day. It's about building systems that make victory inevitable. By the end of this video, you'll have the exact framework that separates winners from everyone else. This isn't theory. This is the operating system that champions use across every domain, from business to sports to relationships. And if you implement what I'm about to share with you, you won't just win occasionally, you'll win systematically, predictably, and relentlessly. Chapter 1. Why most people lose before they even start. Here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to admit. Most people are programmed to lose from the moment they wake up. They don't lose because they lack talent or opportunity. They lose because their entire approach to competition is fundamentally flawed. The first fatal mistake most people make is outcome obsession. They focus entirely on the result they want instead of the process that creates results. They want to win the championship, close the deal, or get the promotion. But they spend all their mental energy visualizing the victory instead of designing the daily actions that make victory possible. This is backwards thinking. And it's why most people remain stuck in mediocrity. When you're obsessed with outcomes, you become emotionally attached to things you can't directly control. You can't control whether your competitor has a good day or a bad day. You can't control market conditions or whether someone else gets lucky. But when your entire identity is wrapped up in winning a specific outcome, every variable outside your control becomes a source of anxiety and distraction. Real winners flip this completely. They become obsessed with process and detached from outcomes. They understand that if you perfect the process, the outcomes become inevitable. If you focus on making the best possible decisions every single day, eventually those decisions compound into results that look like overnight success to everyone else. The second critical error is competitive thinking. Most people believe that winning means beating other people. So they study their competition. They worry about what others are doing and they try to copy the strategies of people who are currently ahead of them. This is amateur thinking and it guarantees you'll always be one step behind. Here's what they don't understand. By the time you've identified someone as your competition and started copying their approach, they've already moved on to the next level. You're playing catch-up in a game where the rules are constantly evolving. Champions don't compete against other people. They compete against the best possible version of themselves. The third mistake is relying on motivation and willpower. Average people wait until they feel motivated to take action. They depend on their emotional state to determine their behavior. They work hard when they're inspired, and slack off when they're not feeling it. This creates an inconsistent pattern of effort that produces inconsistent results. Winners understand that motivation is unreliable and willpower is finite. Instead of depending on how they feel, they build systems that make the right actions automatic. They create environments that pull the right behavior out of them rather than depending on internal motivation to push them forward. The fourth fatal flaw is short-term thinking. Most people evaluate their progress day by day or week by week. When they don't see immediate results, they get discouraged and quit. They jump from strategy to strategy looking for something that works faster. This constant switching prevents them from ever building real momentum. Champions think in decades, not days. They understand that meaningful success takes time to compound. They're willing to invest years in developing capabilities that most people won't invest weeks in building. This long-term perspective allows them to make decisions that seem irrational in the short term but create exponential advantages over time. The final mistake is believing that winning requires sacrifice. Most people think that success means giving up everything else they care about. They believe in the myth of work-life balance as if success and fulfillment are mutually exclusive. This creates internal conflict and makes the pursuit of excellence feel like punishment. Real winners don't sacrifice their lives for success. They design success around the life they actually want to live. They understand that sustainable winning requires alignment between their actions and their values. When your pursuit of excellence is integrated with your identity and your deeper purpose, effort doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like self-expression. Chapter 2. The Universal Winning Framework. Every domain of competition from chess to business to athletics has its own rules, strategies, and techniques. But underneath all the surface-level differences, there's a universal framework that champions use regardless of the specific game they're playing. This framework has 3 core layers: foundation, execution, and evolution. The foundation layer is about building unshakable fundamentals. Most people rush to advanced techniques because fundamentals seem boring and obvious. But champions understand that advanced techniques are worthless without rock-solid fundamentals. The foundation layer has 4 essential components: clarity, capability, character, and consistency. Clarity means knowing exactly what winning looks like in your specific domain. Most people have vague goals like be successful or get in shape. But champions define success with mathematical precision. They know exactly what metrics matter, what benchmarks they need to hit, and what timeline they're working with. This clarity eliminates confusion and allows them to make decisions quickly and confidently. Capability is about systematically building the skills and knowledge required for sustained excellence. Champions don't just practice. They practice deliberately. They identify their weaknesses, design specific exercises to address those weaknesses, and track their improvement with obsessive precision. They understand that capability development never stops, and they allocate time every single day to getting better at the fundamentals. Character is the internal operating system that determines how you respond to pressure, setbacks, and temptation. Champions build character through consistent small choices. They do what they say they're going to do even when nobody's watching. They take responsibility for their results without making excuses. They tell themselves the truth about their performance even when the truth is uncomfortable. Consistency is the bridge between intention and results. Champions understand that what you do occasionally doesn't matter. What you do consistently becomes your identity. They build routines and systems that make the right actions inevitable regardless of how they feel on any particular day. The execution layer is about optimizing performance in real time. This is where strategy meets reality, where preparation meets opportunity. The execution layer has 3 core components: focus, adaptation, and leverage. Focus means directing 100% of your available resources toward the highest impact activities. Champions eliminate distractions ruthlessly. They say no to good opportunities so they can say yes to great ones. They understand that attention is their most valuable resource, and they guard it more carefully than they guard their money. Adaptation means adjusting your approach based on real-time feedback. Champions don't stick to a plan when the plan isn't working. They're constantly gathering information about what's working and what isn't, and they adjust their strategy accordingly. They understand that the map is not the territory, and they're willing to change course when new information becomes available. Leverage means identifying the few actions that create disproportionate results. Champions understand the 80/20 principle at a deep level. They're constantly looking for ways to achieve more with less effort. Not because they're lazy, but because they understand that energy is finite and needs to be allocated strategically. The evolution layer is about continuous improvement and compound advantages. This is where good performers become great and great performers become legendary. The evolution layer has 2 core components: innovation and integration. Innovation means constantly looking for ways to improve the game itself, not just your performance within the current game. Champions don't just play by the existing rules. They find ways to change the rules in their favor. They identify inefficiencies in the current system and create new approaches that give them systematic advantages. Integration means connecting your performance in one domain to your performance in other domains. Champions understand that everything is connected. The discipline you build in fitness transfers to business. The focus you develop in meditation improves your relationships. They look for ways to create synergies between different areas of life so that improvement in one area accelerates improvement in all areas. This framework works because it's based on universal principles rather than domain-specific tactics. The specific techniques you use will vary depending on whether you're trying to win at chess or business or relationships, but the underlying structure remains the same. Master this framework and you'll have the blueprint for winning at anything you choose to pursue. Chapter 3. The Psychology of Systematic Advantage. The biggest difference between winners and losers isn't talent, luck, or opportunity. It's psychology. Champions think differently about competition, pressure, and improvement. They've developed mental models that create systematic advantages in any competitive environment. The first psychological advantage is abundance thinking. Most people operate from scarcity. They believe that if someone else wins, they lose. They see competition as a zero-sum game where resources are limited and victory requires taking something away from someone else. This creates anxiety, desperation, and short-term thinking. Champions operate from abundance. They understand that the best way to win is to create more value than anyone else. Instead of trying to take a bigger piece of the existing pie, they focus on making the pie bigger. This shifts their entire approach from defensive to creative. Instead of protecting what they have, they focus on building what they want. Abundance thinking also changes how you view other people. Instead of seeing everyone as competition, you start seeing potential collaborators, mentors, and teammates. You realize that the most successful people aren't the ones who beat everyone else. They're the ones who elevate everyone around them. The second psychological advantage is anti-fragility. Most people try to avoid challenges, setbacks, and criticism. They want the path to success to be smooth and predictable. But champions understand that challenges don't just build character. They reveal opportunities that only exist under pressure. Anti-fragile thinking means you actively seek out difficulty because you know it makes you stronger. You don't just tolerate stress. You use stress as information about where you need to improve. You don't avoid criticism. You pursue it because you know it's the fastest way to identify blind spots. This mindset transforms setbacks from threats into advantages. When everyone else is panicking about market volatility, you see opportunity. When everyone else is avoiding the difficult conversation, you lean into it because you know that's where breakthrough happens. The third psychological advantage is systems thinking. Most people think in events and outcomes. They see success as a series of individual victories and failures. But champions think in systems and processes. They understand that results are just the natural output of the system they've built. Systems thinking means you focus more on designing the game than winning individual rounds. Instead of trying to will yourself to success through motivation and effort, you build systems that make success automatic. Instead of relying on discipline to force the right behavior, you design your environment to pull the right behavior out of you. This creates compound advantages because systems improve over time while willpower depletes over time. Every iteration makes the system more efficient and effective. Eventually, what required massive effort in the beginning becomes effortless because the system handles most of the work. The fourth psychological advantage is identity-based thinking. Most people try to achieve results that are inconsistent with their identity. They want to be wealthy while seeing themselves as someone who struggles with money. They want to be fit while seeing themselves as someone who hates exercise. This internal conflict creates self-sabotage. Champions align their identity with their desired outcomes. They don't try to achieve success. They become the type of person who naturally creates the results they want. Instead of saying I want to lose weight, they say I am someone who takes care of my body. Instead of saying I want to build a business, they say I am an entrepreneur. This identity shift changes everything. Instead of fighting against their natural tendencies, they're expressing their authentic self. The actions that used to require willpower now feel natural and inevitable. Success becomes a byproduct of being true to who they are. The fifth psychological advantage is long-term greedy thinking. Most people are either short-term greedy or long-term generous. They either maximize immediate gains at the expense of future opportunity, or they sacrifice so much in the short term that they burn out before achieving their long-term goals. Champions are long-term greedy. They're willing to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term advantages, but they're strategic about which sacrifices create the biggest compound returns. They're not trying to be selfless. They're trying to be optimally selfish over the longest possible time horizon. This means they invest heavily in capabilities that pay dividends forever. They prioritize relationships that become more valuable over time. They build assets that generate passive returns. They make decisions that their future self will thank them for. Chapter 4. The Preparation Principle. Champions are made in practice, not in performance. The difference between winners and everyone else is what happens when nobody's watching. While most people focus on game day execution, champions obsess over preparation. They understand that the game is won or lost long before you step into the arena. The first level of preparation is technical mastery. This means developing your skills to such a high level that they become automatic under pressure. Most people practice until they get something right. Champions practice until they can't get it wrong. They understand that when the stakes are high and the pressure is intense, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of preparation. Technical mastery requires deliberate practice, not just repetition. Deliberate practice means working specifically on your weaknesses, getting immediate feedback on your performance, and constantly pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. It's uncomfortable and exhausting, which is why most people avoid it. But it's also the only way to develop capabilities that are truly distinctive. Champions design their practice sessions to be harder than actual competition. They train under more difficult conditions than they'll face in real situations. They practice with heavier weights, shorter deadlines, and more distractions. This way, actual performance feels easy by comparison. The second level of preparation is scenario planning. Champions don't just prepare for the most likely outcomes. They prepare for the full range of possibilities. They think through best-case scenarios, worst-case scenarios, and everything in between. They develop contingency plans for different situations so they're never caught off guard. Scenario planning means asking what-if questions constantly. What if the market crashes? What if your key employee quits? What if your biggest competitor launches a new product? What if you get injured? Champions don't just hope these things won't happen. They develop specific responses for when they do happen. This level of preparation creates confidence that goes beyond optimism. When you've thought through all the ways something could go wrong and developed responses for each scenario, you approach competition with genuine confidence rather than false bravado. The third level of preparation is mental rehearsal. Champions don't just practice physical skills, they practice mental skills. They visualize not just success but the entire process that leads to success. They mentally rehearse, handling pressure, dealing with setbacks, and maintaining focus when everything goes wrong. Mental rehearsal means running through complex scenarios in your mind with the same intensity and detail that you'd bring to physical practice. You visualize not just hitting the winning shot, but making the shot when you're exhausted, when the crowd is hostile, and when you've already missed your last 3 attempts. This type of mental training literally rewires your brain. When you mentally rehearse a scenario repeatedly, you create neural pathways that make the actual experience feel familiar. Your brain can't tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. So mental rehearsal creates muscle memory for situations you haven't actually encountered yet. The fourth level of preparation is resource optimization. Champions understand that preparation isn't just about developing skills. It's about organizing all of your resources for maximum impact. This means optimizing your environment, your schedule, your energy, and your attention. Resource optimization starts with elimination. Before you add new capabilities, you remove everything that's not essential. Champions are ruthless about cutting activities, commitments, and relationships that don't directly contribute to their primary objectives. They understand that saying yes to good things often means saying no to great things. Then you optimize what remains. Champions design their environment to minimize friction and maximize flow. They organize their space so that the right actions are easier than the wrong actions. They structure their day so that their most important work happens when their energy is highest. The fifth level of preparation is adaptive capacity. This is the most advanced form of preparation, and it's what separates good performers from great ones. Adaptive capacity means building the ability to adjust your approach in real time based on changing conditions. Most people prepare for specific scenarios. But champions prepare to be unprepared. They build general capabilities that can be applied to novel situations. They develop pattern recognition skills that allow them to quickly understand new environments. They cultivate comfort with uncertainty so they can think clearly when the unexpected happens. Adaptive capacity means you're not just prepared for the competition you expect. You're prepared for competitions that don't exist yet. You're not just ready for today's challenges. You're ready for challenges that haven't been invented yet. This is the highest form of competitive advantage because it's impossible to copy or predict. Chapter 5. The Compound Victory System. The most powerful competitive advantage isn't winning big once. It's winning small consistently. Champions understand that massive success is always the result of compound advantages that accumulate over time. They don't chase dramatic breakthroughs. They engineer systematic improvements that multiply over months and years. The first principle of compound victory is marginal gains. This concept comes from British cycling, where they improved every aspect of performance by just 1%. They redesigned bike seats for tiny aerodynamic improvements. They taught riders to wash their hands properly to avoid getting sick. And they even painted the inside of the team truck white so they could spot any dust that might affect bike performance. Individually, none of these improvements made a meaningful difference. But collectively, they created a systematic advantage that was impossible for competitors to match. The British cycling team went from never winning a Tour de France to dominating the sport for over a decade. Marginal gains work because they compound exponentially, not linearly. A 1% improvement every day for a year doesn't make you 365% better. It makes you 3,800% better. Most people dramatically underestimate the power of small improvements because they're looking for immediate results rather than long-term transformation. The key to marginal gains is identifying every variable that affects your performance and optimizing each one systematically. Champions don't just focus on the big obvious factors. They optimize their sleep, their nutrition, their environment, their equipment, their mindset, and their recovery. They understand that everything is connected and small improvements in one area amplify improvements in all other areas. The second principle of compound victory is systematic learning. Most people treat learning as something that happens in formal education or training programs. But champions treat learning as a continuous process that happens in real time during actual performance. Systematic learning means extracting lessons from every experience, not just the successful ones. Champions keep detailed records of their decisions and outcomes. They analyze not just what worked and what didn't, but why things worked or didn't work. They look for patterns that reveal underlying principles rather than just collecting random tips and tactics. This creates a compound advantage because your learning rate accelerates over time. As you develop better pattern recognition, you can extract insights more quickly from new experiences. As you build a larger database of mental models, you can make better decisions with less information. As you understand cause and effect relationships more clearly, you can predict outcomes more accurately. The third principle of compound victory is network effects. Champions understand that your network is your net worth, but not in the way most people think. It's not about collecting business cards or LinkedIn connections. It's about building relationships that create compound value for everyone involved. Network effects mean that every person you help succeed makes you more successful as well. When you contribute to other people's victories, they become invested in your victory as well. When you share knowledge and resources generously, people want to share knowledge and resources with you. Champions build networks strategically, but not selfishly. They look for ways to create value for other people before asking for anything in return. They understand that the most powerful networks aren't built on transactions. They're built on transformations. When you help someone become a better version of themselves, you create a relationship that generates compound returns for decades. The fourth principle of compound victory is asset accumulation. Champions don't just work for money. They work to build assets that generate money while they sleep. They understand the difference between trading time for money and building systems that create value independently. Asset accumulation starts with capabilities. Every skill you develop becomes an asset that pays dividends forever. Every piece of knowledge you acquire becomes raw material for solving future problems. Every relationship you build becomes a potential source of opportunities, insights, and resources. But champions go beyond personal assets. They build businesses, brands, and systems that create value for other people. They understand that the most powerful assets are the ones that solve problems for large numbers of people. They focus on building things that become more valuable over time rather than just generating immediate income. The fifth principle of compound victory is identity evolution. Most people try to achieve results that are inconsistent with their identity, which creates internal resistance and makes success feel unnatural. Champions understand that sustainable success requires evolving your identity to match your desired outcomes. Identity evolution means gradually becoming the type of person who naturally creates the results you want. Instead of forcing yourself to act differently, you actually become different. Instead of fighting against your natural tendencies, you reshape your natural tendencies to align with your goals. This happens through consistent small actions that reinforce your desired identity. Every time you choose the difficult right action over the easy wrong action, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with your new identity. Every time you act like the person you want to become, you make it easier to act that way in the future. The compound victory system works because it operates at the level of systems rather than events. Instead of trying to win individual competitions, you build capabilities that make winning automatic. Instead of depending on luck or timing, you create systematic advantages that work regardless of circumstances. This is how champions dominate, not just for months or years, but for decades. Chapter 6. Execution under pressure. The moment of truth separates pretenders from champions. Anyone can perform well when conditions are perfect. When they're well rested, when everything goes according to plan. But real winners are forged in the moments when everything is falling apart, when the stakes are highest, and when failure seems inevitable. Most people crumble under pressure because they fundamentally misunderstand what pressure actually is. They think pressure comes from external circumstances, from high stakes, from other people's expectations. But pressure isn't something that happens to you. Pressure is something you create inside your own mind through how you interpret and respond to challenging situations. The first key to executing under pressure is reframing stress as fuel. Most people try to eliminate stress and anxiety before performing. They want to feel calm and relaxed. But champions understand that stress and anxiety are actually performance enhancers when channeled correctly. The same physiological arousal that creates anxiety also creates peak performance. The difference isn't the presence or absence of stress. The difference is how you interpret that stress. When you feel your heart racing and your palms sweating, you can either think, "I'm nervous and might fail," or, "My body is preparing me for peak performance." The physiological response is identical, but the interpretation changes everything. Champions train themselves to associate stress with excitement rather than fear. They practice performing when their arousal is high, so they learn to use that energy productively. They understand that some level of stress is necessary for peak performance. And they actually seek out high-pressure situations to build their capacity for executing under stress. The second key to pressure performance is present moment awareness. Most people fail under pressure because their mind is everywhere except where it needs to be. They're thinking about the consequences of failure, about what other people will think, about past mistakes, about future opportunities. This mental scatter makes precise execution impossible. Champions develop the ability to narrow their focus to the present moment and the specific task at hand. They're not thinking about winning or losing. They're not thinking about the scoreboard or the clock. They're thinking only about the next action they need to take. This present moment focus eliminates mental interference and allows their training to take over. Present moment awareness is a skill that requires deliberate practice. Champions use meditation, breathing techniques, and mental rehearsal to develop their ability to control their attention under pressure. They practice shifting from broad awareness to narrow focus instantly and repeatedly until it becomes automatic. The third key to pressure performance is process orientation. Most people become outcome-focused under pressure. They start thinking about winning instead of playing. They start worrying about results instead of focusing on execution. This shift in attention creates tension and interferes with natural movement and decision. Champions maintain their process focus regardless of the situation. They focus on their preparation routine, their technique, their game plan. They trust that if they execute their process correctly, the outcome will take care of itself. This removes the pressure of having to create a specific result and allows them to focus on what they can actually control. Process orientation also means having specific protocols for high-pressure situations. Champions don't just wing it. When the stakes are high, they have specific routines for managing their energy, their attention, and their emotions. They have pre-performance rituals that put them in the right mental state. They have in-the-moment techniques for staying focused and calm. The fourth key to pressure performance is adaptive improvisation. While process orientation provides stability, champions also need the ability to adjust when their original plan isn't working. The highest pressure situations are often the most unpredictable, and rigid adherence to a plan can be counterproductive. Adaptive improvisation means having the ability to make real-time adjustments without losing your composure or your confidence. It means being able to read the situation quickly and accurately and adjust your approach accordingly. It means having multiple options available so you're never locked into a single course of action. This requires what psychologists call cognitive flexibility. Champions train their ability to switch between different mental frameworks quickly and smoothly. They practice making decisions with incomplete information. They develop comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity so they can think clearly when the situation is chaotic. The fifth key to pressure performance is emotional regulation. Under high pressure, emotions can either enhance performance or completely derail it. Champions don't try to eliminate emotions. They learn to use emotions strategically to improve their performance. Emotional regulation starts with emotional awareness. Champions develop the ability to recognize their emotional state accurately and quickly. They understand how different emotions affect their performance, and they know which emotional states are optimal for different types of tasks. Then they develop techniques for shifting their emotional state when necessary. They use breathing techniques, visualization, self-talk, and physical movement to create the emotional state that best serves their performance. They understand that emotions are temporary and controllable, not permanent and inevitable. Champions also prepare emotionally for different scenarios. They practice performing when they're angry, when they're disappointed, when they're frustrated. They develop the ability to channel negative emotions into motivation and positive emotions into focus. They understand that emotional mastery is just as important as technical mastery. The final key to pressure performance is identity reinforcement. Under extreme pressure, most people start to doubt themselves. They question their preparation, their ability, their right to be in the situation. This self-doubt becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that guarantees poor performance. Champions use pressure situations to reinforce their identity as winners. They remind themselves of their preparation, their previous successes, their unique capabilities. They use positive self-talk not to pump themselves up artificially, but to remind themselves of objective truths about their abilities and preparation. They also have specific phrases or mantras that they use to anchor their identity under pressure. These aren't generic motivational slogans, they're personal reminders of who they are and what they're capable of. They use these identity anchors to stay connected to their best self when external pressure is trying to make them smaller. Chapter 7. Momentum Mastery. Momentum is the most powerful force in competition, but it's also the most misunderstood. Most people think momentum is something that happens to them randomly, something they get lucky with or unlucky without. But champions understand that momentum is something you create, maintain, and leverage systematically. The first principle of momentum is that it's always available. Most people think momentum only exists when things are going well, when they're on a winning streak, when everything is clicking. But this is backwards thinking. Real momentum isn't created by success. It's created by consistent action regardless of immediate results. Champions understand that momentum is psychological, not circumstantial. It's the feeling that you're moving forward, that you're making progress, that you're building towards something meaningful. This feeling can exist even when external results aren't visible yet. In fact, the most powerful momentum is often built during periods when nothing seems to be working. The key to creating momentum is daily progress. Champions focus on making some form of progress every single day, no matter how small. They understand that the feeling of forward movement is more important than the magnitude of any individual step. A series of small wins creates more momentum than waiting for one big win. This means redefining what counts as progress. Champions celebrate process improvements, not just outcome achievements. They track leading indicators, not just lagging indicators. They measure consistency, effort, and execution quality, not just final results. This allows them to feel momentum even during periods when external results are delayed. The second principle of momentum is that it compounds exponentially, not linearly. Most people expect momentum to build gradually and predictably. They expect steady improvement at a consistent rate, but real momentum doesn't work that way. It builds slowly at first, then accelerates dramatically once it reaches a critical mass. This compound nature of momentum creates two distinct phases, the accumulation phase and the acceleration phase. During the accumulation phase, progress feels slow and results seem minimal. This is when most people quit because they don't see immediate returns on their effort. But champions understand that this is exactly when momentum is being built. During the acceleration phase, progress feels almost effortless and results compound rapidly. This is when external observers think you got lucky or suddenly improved. But champions know that this acceleration is the payoff for all the work they put in during the accumulation phase. Understanding this compound nature changes how you approach momentum building. Instead of expecting immediate results, you focus on building the foundation for future acceleration. Instead of getting discouraged during slow periods, you recognize them as necessary phases in the momentum building process. The third principle of momentum is that it must be protected at all costs. Momentum is fragile. It takes time and effort to build, but it can be destroyed quickly by inconsistency, distraction, or negative thinking. Champions are ruthless about protecting their momentum from anything that might derail it. Protecting momentum starts with protecting your streak. Champions identify the minimum daily action that maintains their forward movement and they commit to never breaking that streak. This might be writing one paragraph, doing 10 push-ups, or making one sales call. The specific action doesn't matter as much as the consistency. Momentum protection also means managing your environment carefully. Champions eliminate or minimize exposure to people, places, and situations that create negative energy or distraction. They surround themselves with inputs that reinforce their forward movement and remove inputs that create doubt or confusion. Champions also protect momentum by managing their internal dialogue. They monitor their self-talk carefully and correct negative or defaced thinking immediately. They understand that momentum is as much about psychology as it is about action, and they guard their mental state as carefully as they guard their time. The fourth principle of momentum is that it can be transferred between domains. Champions don't see their life as separate compartments that don't affect each other. They understand that momentum in one area creates momentum in all areas. Success breeds success and discipline breeds discipline. This means you can build momentum in easier areas and transfer it to more challenging areas. If you're struggling to build momentum in your career, you might start by building momentum in fitness or learning. The feeling of progress and control that you develop in one domain will naturally spill over into other domains. Champions also use micro-momentum to build macro-momentum. They create small wins throughout their day that reinforce their identity as someone who follows through on commitments. They make their bed. They arrive early. They complete small tasks immediately. These micro-wins create a psychological foundation that supports larger achievements. The fifth principle of momentum is that it must be channeled strategically. Raw momentum isn't enough. You need to direct that energy toward your highest priority objectives. Champions don't just build momentum. They steer momentum towards specific outcomes. Strategic momentum channeling means having clear priorities and saying no to opportunities that don't align with your primary objectives. When you have momentum, you'll have more opportunities than you can handle. The temptation is to say yes to everything because you feel like you can handle anything. But this diffuses your momentum and prevents you from achieving breakthrough results in any single area. Champions also use momentum to tackle their biggest challenges. When they feel momentum building, they don't coast. They use that energy to take on the projects they've been avoiding, to have the difficult conversations they've been postponing, to make the big moves they've been planning. They understand that momentum is temporary and must be leveraged while it exists. The final principle of momentum is that it can be manufactured through ritual and routine. Champions don't wait for momentum to appear naturally. They create specific rituals that generate the feeling of momentum on demand. They have morning routines that create forward movement, exercise routines that generate energy, and evening routines that reinforce progress. These momentum-generating rituals work because they create predictable wins. When you complete your morning routine, you've already won the first part of your day. When you finish your workout, you've already accomplished something meaningful. When you complete your evening reflection, you've already reinforced your progress. These small, controllable wins create the psychological foundation for larger victories. Chapter 8. The Adversity Advantage. Every champion has a moment when they almost quit. A moment when the pain was too great, the odds were too steep. The criticism was too harsh. What separates champions from everyone else isn't the absence of these moments. It's how they respond when these moments arrive. Most people see adversity as something to avoid. They try to minimize risk, reduce uncertainty, and create smooth paths to their goals. But champions understand that adversity isn't an obstacle to success. It's the raw material of success. Every significant achievement in history has been built on the foundation of overcome adversity. The first key to leveraging adversity is reframing failure as information. Most people treat failure as evidence that they're not capable of success. They see setbacks as proof that they should quit, that they don't have what it takes, that their goals are unrealistic. This interpretation makes failure devastating and paralyzing. Champions treat failure as data. Every failure contains information about what doesn't work, what needs to be adjusted, what gaps exist in their preparation or strategy. They approach failure with curiosity rather than judgment. They ask, "What can I learn from this?" instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" This reframing transforms failure from an enemy into an ally. Instead of something to be avoided at all costs, failure becomes a tool for accelerated learning. Instead of something that proves you're inadequate, failure becomes something that makes you more capable. Champions also understand that failure is necessary for breakthrough success. The biggest winners are usually the people who have failed the most, not because they're unlucky, but because they've learned the most. They've tested more approaches, discovered more dead ends, and eliminated more possibilities than their competitors. The second key to leveraging adversity is developing antifragile thinking. This concept developed by Nassim Taleb describes systems that don't just survive stress, they actually get stronger from stress. Most people try to build resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from adversity. But champions go beyond resilience to develop anti-fragility. Anti-fragile thinking means actively seeking out challenges that will make you stronger. Instead of avoiding difficult situations, you pursue them because you know they will build capabilities that can't be developed any other way. Instead of trying to make the path easier, you make yourself more capable. This doesn't mean being reckless or stupid. It means being strategic about the types of stress you expose yourself to. Champions choose challenging situations that stretch their capabilities but don't break them. They gradually increase the difficulty of their challenges as their capacity grows. Antifragile thinking also means having systems that improve under pressure. Champions don't just prepare for adversity. They design their approach to actually benefit from adversity. They build redundancy into their plans, so that when one approach fails they have multiple alternatives. They create optionality so that negative events can actually create positive opportunities. The third key to leveraging adversity is emotional alchemy. This is the ability to transform negative emotions into positive energy. Most people get stuck in negative emotional states when things go wrong. They ruminate on setbacks, dwell on criticism, and let disappointment paralyze them. Champions have developed the ability to process negative emotions quickly and extract their energy for productive use. They feel disappointment fully, but they don't stay disappointed. They experience anger, but they channel that anger into motivation. They acknowledge fear, but they use that fear as information about what's important to them. Emotional alchemy starts with emotional acceptance. Champions don't try to avoid negative emotions or pretend they don't exist. They allow themselves to feel whatever emotions arise from adversity, but they don't let those emotions control their actions or define their identity. Then they practice emotional transformation. They have specific techniques for converting negative emotional energy into positive action. They might use physical exercise to transform frustration into determination. They might use journaling to transform confusion into clarity. They might use meditation to transform anxiety into focus. The fourth key to leveraging adversity is building antifragile relationships. Champions understand that adversity reveals who your real allies are. Crisis has a way of stripping away pretense and showing people's true character. Champions use adversity as an opportunity to deepen relationships with people who show up during difficult times and distance themselves from people who disappear. Antifragile relationships are relationships that become stronger under stress. These are relationships built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care rather than convenience or transaction. When you face adversity together, these relationships develop a depth and trust that can't be created any other way. Champions also use adversity as an opportunity to serve others when they're going through difficult times. They look for ways to help other people who are facing similar challenges. This service orientation transforms personal suffering into meaningful contribution, which changes the entire experience of adversity. The fifth key to leveraging adversity is strategic narrative construction. Champions understand that how you tell the story of your adversity determines how that adversity affects you. The same set of events can be told as either a tragedy or a hero's journey depending on how you frame the narrative. Strategic narrative construction means positioning yourself as the hero of your story, not the victim. Heroes face challenges, overcome obstacles, and emerge stronger. Victims have things happen to them that they can't control. The difference isn't in the events themselves. It's in how those events are interpreted and integrated. Champions also understand that adversity is temporary, but the lessons are permanent. They focus more on who they're becoming through the adversity than on what they're going through during the adversity. They ask, how is this making me stronger? Rather than why is this happening to me? This narrative framework transforms even the most difficult experiences into valuable assets. Every challenge overcome becomes evidence of your capability. Every setback survived becomes proof of your resilience. Every lesson learned becomes wisdom that can be applied to future challenges. The final key to leveraging adversity is post-adversity growth. Champions don't just survive adversity. They use adversity as a catalyst for reaching new levels of performance. They emerge from difficult periods, not just intact, but actually better than they were before. Post-adversity growth happens when you use the clarity and motivation that comes from surviving difficult times to make significant improvements in your approach. Adversity has a way of showing you what's truly important and eliminating everything that's not essential. Champions use this clarity to streamline their focus and eliminate distractions. They also use the confidence that comes from surviving adversity to take bigger risks and pursue bigger opportunities. When you've proven to yourself that you can handle difficult situations, you become more willing to put yourself in situations where the upside is high, even if the risk is significant. Chapter 9. Advanced Competitive Intelligence. Most people compete blindly. They focus on their own performance without understanding the competitive landscape, the strategic dynamics, or the underlying patterns that determine who wins and who loses. But champions operate with what military strategists call situational awareness. They understand not just their own game, but the entire system within which they're competing. The first level of competitive intelligence is pattern recognition. Champions don't just react to individual events. They identify the deeper patterns that create those events. They study their competition not to copy what they're doing, but to understand the principles that drive their success or failure. Pattern recognition starts with data collection. Champions systematically gather information about their competitive environment. They track not just obvious metrics like scores or market share but subtle indicators like energy levels, decision patterns, resource allocation strategies and response time to changing conditions. But data collection is useless without analysis. Champions develop frameworks for interpreting the data they collect. They look for leading indicators that predict future performance. They identify cyclical patterns that reveal optimal timing for different strategies. They spot trend lines that show whether competitors are improving or declining. The most sophisticated pattern recognition involves understanding causal relationships. Champions don't just notice that certain things happen together. They understand why those things happen together. They can predict how changes in one variable will affect other variables. This gives them the ability to influence outcomes by adjusting the right inputs at the right time. The second level of competitive intelligence is strategic positioning. Champions understand that where you compete is often more important than how you compete. They don't just try to beat their current competition. They position themselves in spaces where they have systematic advantages. Strategic positioning starts with competitive landscape analysis. Champions map out all the players in their space, their relative strengths and weaknesses, their likely future moves, and the resources they have available. They identify gaps in the market where their unique capabilities would create the strongest advantage. Champions also understand that competition evolves constantly. Today's competitive advantages become tomorrow's table stakes. Champions position themselves not just for current conditions, but for where they predict the competition will be in the future. They develop capabilities that will be valuable in the next generation of competition. Not just the current generation. This forward-thinking approach often means making investments that seem unnecessary in the short term but create decisive advantages in the long term. Champions are willing to sacrifice short-term competitive position to build long-term competitive dominance. The third level of competitive intelligence is psychological profiling. Champions understand that competition is ultimately between people, not just strategies or resources. Understanding the psychology of your competitors gives you insights that can't be gained through analysis of their public actions alone. Psychological profiling means understanding how your competitors think, what motivates them, what their fears and weaknesses are, and how they're likely to respond under different types of pressure. Champions develop detailed mental models of their key competitors that allow them to predict their behavior in novel situations. This isn't about manipulation or exploitation. It's about understanding the human element of competition so you can make better strategic decisions. If you know that a competitor is risk-averse, you can use more aggressive strategies to force them into uncomfortable positions. If you know that a competitor is emotionally driven, you can remain rational when they become reactive. Champions also use psychological profiling for competitive empathy. They try to understand not just what their competitors are doing, but why they're doing it. This deeper understanding often reveals opportunities for collaboration or reveals strategic mistakes that competitors are making unconsciously. The fourth level of competitive intelligence is system dynamics analysis. Champions understand that they're not just competing against other individuals or companies. They're operating within complex systems that have their own rules, incentives, and feedback loops. System dynamics analysis means understanding how different parts of the competitive system interact with each other. Champions identify leverage points where small changes can create disproportionate results. They understand how changes in one part of the system will ripple through other parts of the system. Champions also understand that the most powerful competitive moves are the ones that change the system itself rather than just improving your position within the current system. Instead of playing the existing game better, they look for ways to change the rules of the game in their favor. This might mean creating new categories where they can be first to market. It might mean changing customer expectations about what's possible or necessary. It might mean shifting the basis of competition from areas where they're weak to areas where they're strong. The fifth level of competitive intelligence is anticipatory adaptation. This is the most advanced form of competitive intelligence, and it's what separates good competitors from great ones. Anticipatory adaptation means making strategic adjustments before your competitors even realize that adjustments are necessary. Anticipatory adaptation requires what futurists call weak signal detection. Champions monitor early indicators of change that most people don't notice or ignore. They pay attention to shifts in customer behavior, emerging technologies, regulatory changes, cultural trends, and economic patterns that might affect future competition. But detecting weak signals isn't enough. Champions develop scenario planning capabilities that allow them to prepare for multiple possible futures. They don't try to predict exactly what will happen. They prepare to adapt quickly regardless of what happens. This preparation involves building adaptive capacity rather than just optimizing for current conditions. Champions develop resources, capabilities, and relationships that will be valuable across multiple scenarios. They create optionality that allows them to pivot quickly when conditions change. The final level of competitive intelligence is meta-competition awareness. Champions understand that there are multiple levels of competition happening simultaneously. While most people focus on direct competition within their immediate category, champions are aware of competition for attention, resources, talent, and opportunity that transcends traditional competitive boundaries. Meta-competition awareness means understanding that your real competition might not be other people in your specific industry. Your real competition might be other ways that people spend their time, other solutions to the same underlying problem, or other priorities that compete for the same resources. Champions also understand that the most dangerous competitors are often the ones you don't see coming. The biggest competitive threats usually come from outside your traditional competitive space. Champions monitor adjacent industries, emerging technologies and changing customer needs that might create new forms of competition. This broad perspective prevents champions from becoming too narrowly focused on their immediate competitive environment. It helps them identify opportunities and threats that more narrowly focused competitors miss entirely. Chapter 10. The Mastery Mindset. The difference between good and great isn't talent, luck, or opportunity. It's the mindset you bring to the pursuit of excellence. Champions think differently about improvement, differently about time, differently about the relationship between effort and results. They have what psychologists call a mastery mindset, and this mindset makes the difference between temporary success and sustained dominance. The first principle of the mastery mindset is process obsession over outcome attachment. Most people are outcome addicts. They're motivated by external rewards, external recognition, external validation. They work hard when they're making progress toward their goals and lose motivation when progress slows down or stops. Champions are process addicts. They're motivated by the intrinsic satisfaction of improvement itself. They love the work for its own sake, not just for what the work produces. This process obsession creates sustainable motivation that doesn't depend on external circumstances or immediate results. Process obsession means finding genuine enjoyment in the daily activities that create excellence. Champions don't just tolerate practice. They love practice. They don't just endure the grind. They embrace the grind. They understand that the process is not just the means to the end. The process is the end. This mindset shift changes everything. When you're obsessed with process, setbacks become interesting rather than devastating. When you're focused on improvement rather than achievement, every day becomes an opportunity to get better regardless of external circumstances. When you love the work itself, you can sustain effort over the long periods of time required for true mastery. The second principle of the mastery mindset is beginner's mind maintenance. Most people lose their learning capacity as they gain expertise. They become attached to their current level of knowledge and resist information that contradicts what they think they know. They stop asking questions and start defending answers. Champions maintain what Zen Buddhists call beginner's mind. They approach every situation with curiosity and openness regardless of their level of expertise. They understand that expertise can become a liability if it prevents you from seeing new possibilities or adapting to changing conditions. Beginner's mind means being willing to look stupid in service of learning something new. Champions ask questions that might seem obvious. They experiment with approaches that might seem inferior to their current methods. They study people who are less experienced but might have insights they're missing. Champions also practice intellectual humility. They hold their beliefs and methods lightly, always ready to update them when new information becomes available. They understand that the moment you think you figured everything out is the moment you stop growing. The third principle of the mastery mindset is long-term thinking with short-term intensity. Most people are either long-term dreamers with no immediate urgency or short-term grinders with no strategic perspective. Champions combine the best of both approaches. Long-term thinking means making decisions based on where you want to be years or decades from now, not just months from now. Champions are willing to make investments today that won't pay off for years because they understand that compound growth requires long investment horizons. But long-term thinking without short-term intensity leads to procrastination and complacency. Champions bring maximum intensity to their daily execution while maintaining perspective on their long-term vision. They understand that long-term success is built through a series of short-term wins executed with maximum focus and effort. This combination creates what psychologists call sustainable peak performance. Champions can maintain high levels of effort over extended periods of time because they're driven by a compelling long-term vision, but they execute that vision through daily actions that are completely within their control. The fourth principle of the mastery mindset is systematic experimentation. Champions don't just repeat what they've always done. They're constantly testing new approaches, new techniques, new strategies. They understand that what got them to their current level won't necessarily get them to the next level. Systematic experimentation means treating your development like a science experiment. Champions form hypotheses about what might improve their performance. Design tests to evaluate those hypotheses and measure the results objectively. They keep detailed records of what they try and what results those experiments produce. But experimentation isn't random. Champions experiment strategically, focusing on variables that have the highest potential impact on their performance. They understand the difference between optimization and innovation, and they know when to refine their current approach versus when to try something completely different. Champions also understand that most experiments fail and they're comfortable with that failure rate. They understand that finding one breakthrough improvement requires testing many approaches that don't work. They treat failed experiments as valuable information rather than wasted effort. The fifth principle of the mastery mindset is performance partnership. Champions understand that mastery is not a solo journey. The highest levels of performance require collaboration with other people who share their commitment to excellence. They seek out coaches, mentors, training partners, and teammates who push them beyond what they could achieve alone. Performance partnership means being strategically vulnerable. Champions are willing to expose their weaknesses to people who can help them improve. They seek out feedback even when that feedback is uncomfortable or challenging. They understand that growth requires getting outside your comfort zone, and sometimes that means letting other people see you at less than your best. Champions also understand that teaching others is one of the fastest ways to deepen your own mastery. When you have to explain something clearly to someone else, you're forced to understand it at a deeper level yourself. When you have to answer questions about your approach, you're forced to examine assumptions you might have taken for granted. The final principle of the mastery mindset is legacy thinking. Champions understand that true mastery isn't just about personal achievement. It's about contributing something meaningful that lasts beyond your own performance. They think about how they can use their abilities to create value for other people and leave something better than they found it. Legacy thinking changes how you approach mastery. Instead of just trying to be the best, you're trying to advance the entire field. Instead of just optimizing your own performance, you're trying to discover principles that other people can use to improve their performance. Instead of just winning competitions, you're trying to elevate the level of competition itself. This broader purpose creates a deeper source of motivation that sustains effort over the decades required for true mastery. When your pursuit of excellence is connected to something larger than yourself, you can maintain intensity and focus even when personal motivation fluctuates. Champions also understand that mastery is never finished. There's always a next level, always a new challenge, always a way to contribute more value. This infinite game mindset prevents complacency and keeps them growing long after they've achieved what most people would consider complete success. Chapter 11. Decision-making under uncertainty. Champions face the same uncertain world as everyone else, but they make decisions differently. While most people are paralyzed by incomplete information and unknowable outcomes, champions have developed systematic approaches to making high-quality decisions even when they can't predict the future. The first principle of decision-making under uncertainty is probabilistic thinking. Most people think in absolutes. They want to know what will definitely happen before they make a decision. They wait for certainty that never comes, or they make decisions based on wishful thinking rather than realistic assessment. Champions think in probabilities. They understand that every decision is a bet on an uncertain future. So they focus on making bets that have positive expected value over time. They don't need to be right every time. They just need to be right more often than they're wrong. And they need their wins to be bigger than their losses. Probabilistic thinking means gathering the best available information, acknowledging what you don't know, and making decisions based on your best estimate of likely outcomes. Champions assign rough probabilities to different scenarios and make decisions that position them well across the range of possible futures. This approach requires intellectual honesty about uncertainty. Champions don't pretend to know things they don't know, and they don't let overconfidence bias their assessment of probabilities. They understand that being approximately right is better than being precisely wrong. The second principle of decision M under uncertainty is optionality creation. Champions don't just make decisions, they make decisions that create more decisions. They look for choices that preserve future flexibility rather than locking them into single paths. Optionality creation means structuring decisions so that good outcomes give you more opportunities and bad outcomes don't destroy your ability to keep playing. Champions avoid decisions that create binary win or lose outcomes. Instead, they look for decisions that create multiple ways to win and limited ways to lose catastrophically. This might mean taking smaller initial risks that can be scaled up if they work well. It might mean building reversible experiments rather than making permanent commitments. It might mean developing multiple income streams rather than depending on a single source of revenue. Champions also understand that optionality has value even when you never exercise the options. Having choices gives you confidence to take bigger risks because you know you have fallback plans. It gives you negotiating power because you're not desperate for any single outcome. It gives you peace of mind because you're not completely dependent on any single factor outside your control. The third principle of decision-making under uncertainty is rapid feedback integration. Champions don't just make decisions and hope for the best. They design their decisions to generate information quickly so they can adjust course before small mistakes become big disasters. Rapid feedback integration means breaking big decisions into smaller experiments whenever possible. Instead of betting everything on a single approach, champions test their assumptions with smaller investments first. They look for ways to get market feedback, customer feedback, and performance feedback as quickly and cheaply as possible. Champions also develop internal feedback systems that help them recognize when their initial assumptions were wrong. They set specific milestones and decision points where they'll reassess their approach. They create objective criteria for determining when to continue, when to pivot, and when to quit. This experimental approach to decision M reduces the cost of being wrong and increases the speed of learning. Champions make more decisions than most people, but each individual decision carries less risk because they're constantly gathering information and making adjustments. The fourth principle of decision-making under uncertainty is asymmetric risk management. Champions look for decisions where the potential upside is much larger than the potential downside. They're willing to accept small manageable risks in exchange for the possibility of disproportionate rewards. Asymmetric risk management means understanding the difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk can be calculated and managed through diversification and insurance. Uncertainty is irreducible and must be navigated through adaptation and optionality. Champions also understand that different types of risk require different management strategies. Reputational risk might be managed through conservative public behavior. Financial risk might be managed through diversification and emergency reserves. Career risk might be managed through skill development and network building. The key is to take calculated risks in areas where you have knowledge and capability while being conservative in areas where you lack expertise or where the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. The fifth principle of decision M under uncertainty is decision velocity optimization. Champions understand that in a rapidly changing world, the speed of decision-making is often more important than the perfection of individual decisions. They'd rather make good decisions quickly than perfect decisions slowly. Decision velocity optimization means having frameworks and criteria that allow you to make decisions quickly without extensive analysis paralysis. Champions develop decision-making templates for common situations so they don't have to reinvent their approach every time. They also understand the cost of delayed decisions. While you're gathering more information and analyzing more options, opportunities are disappearing and competitors are moving forward. Champions factor this opportunity cost into their decision-making process. Champions also practice what Jeff Bezos calls disagree and commit. When they can't reach consensus or complete certainty, They're willing to commit fully to a course of action, even if they have reservations. They understand that partial commitment often guarantees failure regardless of whether the decision itself was correct. The final principle of decision-making under uncertainty is meta-decision awareness. Champions don't just think about what to decide. They think about how to decide. They're constantly refining their decision-making process based on the outcomes of previous decisions. Meta-decision awareness means tracking not just what decisions you made but what process you used to make those decisions and what factors influenced your thinking. Champions keep decision journals where they record their reasoning, their assumptions and their level of confidence at the time of the decision. Then they review these journals periodically to identify patterns in their decision-making. They look for systematic biases, recurring blind spots, and process improvements that could improve their future decisions. Champions also understand that different types of decisions require different processes. Irreversible decisions require more analysis than reversible decisions. High-stakes decisions require more consultation than low-stakes decisions. Urgent decisions require simpler frameworks than complex strategic decisions. Chapter 12. Systems designed for inevitable success. Champions don't depend on motivation, willpower, or luck to create results. They design systems that make success automatic. While most people rely on their daily decisions to determine their outcomes, champions create environments and processes that pull the right behavior out of them consistently. The first principle of systems design is environmental architecture. Champions understand that your environment shapes your behavior more than your intentions do. They design their physical and social environment to make good choices easier and bad choices harder. Environmental architecture starts with eliminating friction from positive behaviors. Champions organize their space so that the actions they want to take require minimal effort and decision. If they want to exercise every morning, they lay out their workout clothes the night before. If they want to eat healthy, they fill their refrigerator with healthy options and remove unhealthy options. Champions also add friction to negative behaviors. They make destructive choices, require more effort, and conscious decision-making. They put their phone in another room when they need to focus. They delete social media apps from their phone, so accessing them requires deliberate action rather than mindless scrolling. Environmental architecture also includes social environment design. Champions surround themselves with people who share their values and support their goals. They minimize time spent with people who drain their energy or encourage destructive behaviors. They understand that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The second principle of systems design is process automation. Champions identify the key behaviors that drive their success and make those behaviors as automatic as possible. They understand that willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted throughout the day. So they minimize the number of decisions required for important actions. Process automation means creating routines and checklists that eliminate decision fatigue. Champions have morning routines that put them in the right mental state for the day. They have work routines that ensure their most important tasks get completed. They have evening routines that help them recover and prepare for the next day. Champions also automate their decision-making criteria. Instead of deciding whether to exercise based on how they feel each day, they exercise at the same time every day, regardless of their mood. Instead of deciding whether to save money based on what's left over each month, they automatically transfer a fixed percentage to savings. This automation extends to their business and career systems as well. Champions create standardized processes for recurring tasks. They develop templates and frameworks that allow them to handle similar situations consistently and efficiently. The third principle of systems design is feedback loop optimization. Champions design their systems to provide clear immediate feedback about their performance. They understand that behavior that gets measured and monitored improves automatically. Feedback loop optimization means creating metrics and tracking systems that show you whether you're moving toward your goals or away from them. Champions track leading indicators, not just lagging indicators. They measure inputs like effort and consistency, not just outputs like results and outcomes. Champions also design their feedback systems to be objective rather than subjective. Instead of relying on how they feel about their progress, they rely on specific, measurable data. They use tools and technologies that track their performance automatically so they can't fool themselves about their actual results. The feedback loops also include regular review and adjustment periods. Champions schedule weekly, monthly, and quarterly reviews where they analyze their performance data and make adjustments to their systems. They treat their personal and professional systems like software that needs regular updates and improvements. The fourth principle of systems design is redundancy and resilience. Champions understand that even the best systems will occasionally fail. So they build backup systems and recovery protocols that keep them moving forward when their primary systems break down. Redundancy means having multiple ways to achieve the same outcome. If champions rely on their gym for exercise, they also have home workout options for when the gym is closed. If they rely on a particular income source, they also develop alternative revenue streams. If they rely on a particular skill set, they also develop complementary capabilities. Resilience means designing systems that can handle stress and disruption without completely breaking down. Champions build slack and buffer capacity into their systems so they can handle unexpected demands or temporary setbacks without derailing their long-term progress. Champions also practice system stress testing. They occasionally put their systems under deliberate pressure to see how they perform and where the weak points are. They travel to test their routines in different environments. They increase their workload temporarily to see how their productivity systems handle the stress. The fifth principle of systems design is scalability and evolution. Champions design their systems to grow with them as their capabilities and ambitions expand. They don't just create systems that work for their current situation. They create systems that can adapt to changing circumstances and increasing demands. Scalability means building systems that become more powerful as you invest more resources in them. Champions create learning systems that compound over time. They build network systems that become more valuable as they grow larger. They develop skill systems that create synergies between different capabilities. Evolution means building systems that improve themselves over time. Champions create systems that learn from their own performance and automatically adjust to become more effective. They build in experimentation and optimization protocols that constantly test new approaches and integrate successful improvements. Champions also understand that systems must evolve as they do. The systems that work at one stage of development may not work at the next stage. They regularly evaluate whether their current systems are still serving their current goals and make major changes when necessary. The final principle of systems design is integration and synergy. Champions don't create isolated systems for different areas of their life. They design integrated systems where improvement in one area automatically supports improvement in other areas. Integration means looking for connections and synergies between different aspects of your life and work. Champions design their fitness systems to support their cognitive performance. They design their work systems to reinforce their personal values. They design their learning systems to compound their career development. This integrated approach creates leverage where individual improvements have multiplied effects across multiple domains. Champions get more return on their investment in system development because each improvement benefits multiple areas of their life simultaneously. Chapter 13. The Compound Advantage Accelerator. Most people understand compound interest in theory, but they completely miss how to apply compounding to competitive advantage. Champions don't just let their advantages compound naturally over time. They actively design accelerators that make their advantages compound faster and more powerfully. The first accelerator is skill stacking. Instead of trying to become the best in the world at one thing, champions become very good at multiple complementary skills that create unique combinations. They understand that being in the top 10% in 3 different skills can make you more valuable than being in the top 1% in any single skill. Skill stacking works because unique combinations are harder for competitors to replicate than individual excellencies. If you're the best programmer in your company, other companies can hire better programmers. But if you're a programmer who also understands design and marketing, that combination is much harder to replace. Champions choose their skill stacks strategically. They look for combinations that create synergies where each skill makes the others more powerful. They prioritize skills that are becoming more valuable over time rather than skills that are becoming commoditized. The key to effective skill stacking is identifying the meta skills that accelerate learning in all domains. Champions develop skills like pattern recognition, systems thinking, and rapid feedback processing that make them better at acquiring and applying new capabilities across different fields. The second accelerator is relationship compounding. Champions understand that relationships aren't just about networking for immediate opportunities. They're about creating compound value that grows over decades. They invest in relationships that become more valuable over time as all parties become more successful and capable. Relationship compounding means helping other people win in ways that also help you win. Champions look for opportunities to create value for other people that also creates value for themselves. They understand that the most powerful relationships are based on mutual benefit rather than one-sided extraction. Champions also understand that relationship compound interest is different from financial compound interest. Relationships compound exponentially when trust and mutual value creation reach critical mass. A relationship that takes years to develop can suddenly become incredibly valuable when the right opportunity appears. This means playing the long game with relationships. Champions invest time and energy in relationships that might not pay immediate dividends but have the potential for significant future value. They maintain relationships even when there's no immediate need because they understand that the most valuable opportunities often come from unexpected sources. The third accelerator is knowledge leverage. Champions don't just accumulate knowledge. They organize knowledge in ways that create exponential returns. They build personal knowledge systems that make their learning compound over time. Knowledge leverage starts with connecting new information to existing knowledge rather than treating each piece of information as isolated. Champions develop mental models and frameworks that allow them to organize and integrate new insights with what they already know. Champions also create knowledge systems that turn their learning into assets that can be shared and monetized. They write, teach, speak, and consult in ways that force them to organize their knowledge clearly and share it with others. This process of teaching deepens their own understanding while creating additional value streams. The most sophisticated knowledge leverage involves creating systems that learn and improve themselves. Champions develop processes for capturing insights, testing hypotheses, and refining their understanding based on real-world feedback. Their knowledge doesn't just accumulate, it evolves and becomes more accurate over time. The fourth accelerator is platform building. Champions don't just create value. They create platforms that allow other people to create value in ways that benefit everyone. They understand that the most powerful competitive advantages come from building ecosystems rather than just optimizing individual performance. Platform building means creating systems, processes, communities, or technologies that become more valuable as more people use them. Champions look for opportunities to create network effects where each new participant makes the platform more valuable for all existing participants. This might mean building audiences through content creation, developing communities around shared interests, creating business systems that scale with team growth, or developing expertise that becomes the foundation for consulting or training businesses. Platform building requires thinking beyond immediate personal benefit to consider how your success can enable other people's success in ways that create sustainable competitive advantages. The fifth accelerator is systematic innovation. Champions don't just improve within existing frameworks. They create new frameworks that give them systematic advantages. They understand that the biggest competitive advantages come from changing the rules of the game rather than just playing the existing game better. Systematic innovation means constantly looking for ways to do things differently rather than just doing things better. Champions question assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. They experiment with approaches that seem counterintuitive or impossible. Champions also develop innovation systems that generate new ideas consistently rather than waiting for inspiration to strike randomly. They create processes for identifying problems, generating solutions, testing hypotheses, and implementing improvements. The most powerful systematic innovation involves creating new categories rather than competing in existing categories. Champions look for opportunities to be first in new markets rather than fighting for share in established markets. The final accelerator is multiplicative thinking. Champions look for opportunities where their efforts create exponential rather than linear returns. They understand that some activities create compound effects that multiply their impact far beyond their direct contribution. Multiplicative thinking means looking for leverage points where small inputs create disproportionate outputs. Champions identify bottlenecks that, when removed, unlock massive improvements across entire systems. They look for catalytic actions that trigger chain reactions of positive change. Champions also understand timing and positioning for multiplicative effects. They recognize when markets, technologies, or social conditions are ready for dramatic change and position themselves to benefit from those transitions. This requires developing intuition for exponential versus linear opportunities. Champions learn to recognize when they're in situations where additional effort will produce proportional results versus situations where additional effort could produce exponential results. Chapter 14. Mental Warfare and Psychological Dominance. Competition is ultimately a mental game. Physical skills, technical knowledge, and strategic thinking are important. But when competitors are evenly matched in these areas, the winner is determined by who has superior mental game. Champions understand this and develop psychological advantages that are invisible to their competitors, but decisive in determining outcomes. The first weapon in mental warfare is unshakable confidence. This isn't arrogance or false bravado. It's genuine confidence based on superior preparation, proven capabilities, and systematic advantages. Champions build confidence through competence, not through positive thinking or motivational tricks. Unshakable confidence comes from knowing that you've done everything possible to prepare for the competition ahead. Champions' confidence is based on objective evidence of their capabilities, not subjective feelings about their potential. They know what they can do because they've done it repeatedly under increasingly challenging conditions. This confidence becomes a weapon because it affects how competitors respond to you. When your opponents can sense your complete confidence in your ability to win, it plants seeds of doubt in their minds. They start second-guessing their own preparation and strategy. They become more reactive and less creative in their approach. Champions also understand that confidence is contagious in both directions. Doubt spreads just as quickly as confidence. Champions maintain their confidence even when things go wrong because they know that any display of uncertainty or frustration will energize their opponents and demoralize their teammates. The second weapon in mental warfare is emotional regulation mastery. While their competitors are being controlled by their emotions, champions are using their emotions strategically to enhance their performance. They understand that emotions are tools that can be sharpened and wielded with precision. Emotional regulation mastery means having the ability to access any emotional state that serves your performance in the moment. Champions can generate intensity when they need to push through fatigue. They can create calm when they need to execute precise techniques. They can summon aggression when they need to be assertive or compassion when they need to build alliances. Champions also use emotional regulation as a competitive weapon. They remain emotionally stable when their opponents are trying to provoke them. They use their opponents' emotional reactions as information about their mental state and adjust their strategy accordingly. The most sophisticated emotional regulation involves using your opponent's emotions against them. Champions learn to trigger specific emotional responses in their competitors that lead to strategic mistakes. They might use aggressive tactics to make reactive opponents overcommit. Or they might use patience to frustrate impatient opponents into making premature moves. The third weapon in mental warfare is attention control. In a world full of distractions, the ability to maintain complete focus on what matters most is a decisive competitive advantage. Champions develop laser-like focus that allows them to ignore everything irrelevant and direct all their mental resources toward optimal performance. Attention control starts with clarity about what deserves your attention and what doesn't. Champions develop mental filters that automatically screen out irrelevant information and potential distractions. They practice staying focused on their process rather than getting distracted by external circumstances or opponent behavior. Champions also use attention control as an offensive weapon. They find ways to capture their opponent's attention and direct it away from optimal performance. They might use unexpected tactics that force opponents to spend mental energy adapting rather than executing their strengths. The most advanced attention control involves managing not just your own attention, but influencing where your opponents and teammates direct their attention. Champions become skilled at highlighting information that supports their strategic objectives and minimizing information that doesn't. The fourth weapon in mental warfare is narrative control. Champions understand that the story being told about the competition affects everyone's psychology, including their own. They take active responsibility for shaping the narrative in ways that create psychological advantages. Narrative control means framing the competition in terms that favor your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. Champions might frame a competition as a test of preparation versus natural talent when they know they've prepared more thoroughly. They might frame it as experience versus youth when they have the experience advantage. Champions also understand that narratives become self-fulfilling prophecies. When everyone believes a certain story about how the competition will unfold, people unconsciously behave in ways that make that story become true. Champions work to establish narratives that create psychological pressure on their opponents and psychological advantages for themselves. The most sophisticated narrative control involves creating multiple plausible narratives that all favor your position. Champions prepare explanations for different scenarios that maintain their psychological advantage regardless of how events unfold. The fifth weapon in mental warfare is strategic unpredictability. While consistency is important for skill development, unpredictability is crucial for competitive advantage. Champions develop the ability to vary their approach in ways that keep opponents off balance without compromising their own performance. Strategic unpredictability means having multiple ways to achieve the same objective so you can't be defended against easily. Champions develop diverse skill sets and tactical approaches that allow them to adapt their strategy based on their opponent's weaknesses and expectations. Champions also use unpredictability to create psychological uncertainty in their opponents. When opponents can't predict what you're going to do next, they can't prepare as effectively and they spend mental energy trying to guess your strategy instead of executing their own. The most advanced strategic unpredictability involves creating patterns that seem random but are actually based on systematic decision-making frameworks that opponents can't decipher. The final weapon in mental warfare is superior intelligence gathering. Champions know more about their opponents than their opponents know about them. This information asymmetry creates strategic advantages that can be decisive in close competitions. Superior intelligence gathering means systematically collecting information about opponents' strengths, weaknesses, patterns, tendencies, and psychological triggers. Champions study how opponents respond to different types of pressure, what tactics disrupt their performance, and what strategies they struggle to counter. Champions also practice information security to prevent opponents from gathering similar intelligence about them. They vary their training routines, limit access to strategic information, and sometimes deliberately create false impressions about their capabilities or intentions. The most sophisticated intelligence operations involve creating feedback loops where you gather information about how opponents respond to your intelligence gathering, allowing you to refine your approach based on how they adapt to your efforts. Chapter 15. Becoming Unstoppable. Everything we've covered in this guide leads to one ultimate objective: Becoming unstoppable. Not invincible, not perfect, not immune to setbacks, but unstoppable. Champions develop a quality that allows them to continue moving forward regardless of obstacles, opposition, or temporary failures. The first element of becoming unstoppable is identity integration. Champions don't just do winning behaviors. They become winners at the level of identity. Their pursuit of excellence isn't something they do. It's who they are. This identity integration makes their winning behaviors automatic and sustainable over long periods. Identity integration means aligning every aspect of your life with your commitment to excellence. Champions don't compartmentalize their lives into areas where they pursue excellence and areas where they accept mediocrity. They understand that excellence is a way of being, not just a way of performing in specific domains. This alignment creates internal consistency that eliminates the psychological friction that most people experience between who they want to be and how they actually behave. When your identity and your actions are perfectly aligned, you stop fighting against yourself and all your energy can be directed toward external challenges. Champions also understand that identity is malleable and can be consciously designed. They don't accept limiting beliefs about what they're capable of or what type of person they are. They systematically replace limiting identities with empowering identities that support their highest aspirations. The second element of becoming unstoppable is systematic value creation. Champions understand that sustainable success requires creating value for other people, not just extracting value for themselves. They become unstoppable because other people become invested in their success. Systematic value creation means looking for opportunities to solve problems, meet needs, and improve situations for other people in ways that align with your own goals and capabilities. Champions build their success on a foundation of genuine contribution rather than just personal advancement. This approach creates sustainable competitive advantages because it's based on creating win-win situations rather than zero-sum competitions. When your success depends on helping other people succeed, you develop allies and supporters rather than just competitors and obstacles. Champions also understand that value creation compounds over time. Every person you help becomes a potential source of opportunities, referrals, partnerships, and support. Every problem you solve builds your reputation and capabilities for solving bigger problems in the future. The third element of becoming unstoppable is antifragile adaptation. Champions don't just survive challenges. They use challenges as raw material for becoming stronger. They develop the ability to extract advantage from adversity and opportunity from obstacles. Antifragile adaptation means building systems and capabilities that actually improve under stress. Champions create redundancy that allows them to continue operating when primary systems fail. They develop optionality that gives them multiple paths forward when original plans become impossible. Champions also practice proactive stress testing. They voluntarily expose themselves to controlled challenges that build their capacity to handle unexpected difficulties. They seek out difficult situations that stretch their capabilities and reveal areas for improvement. The most sophisticated antifragile adaptation involves creating systematic advantages from the same forces that create disadvantages for your competitors. Champions find ways to benefit from volatility, uncertainty, and change while their competitors are disrupted by these same forces. The fourth element of becoming unstoppable is exponential learning. Champions don't just accumulate knowledge and experience. They develop meta-learning capabilities that allow them to learn faster over time. Their learning rate accelerates as they become more sophisticated learners. Exponential learning means developing pattern recognition that allows you to extract insights from new experiences more quickly. Champions build mental models and frameworks that help them organize new information and connect it to existing knowledge more effectively. Champions also develop rapid feedback processing capabilities that allow them to adjust their approach in real time based on new information. They become skilled at distinguishing between useful feedback and noise, and they develop systems for implementing improvements quickly and systematically. The most advanced exponential learning involves developing the ability to learn from other people's experiences rather than just your own. Champions study the successes and failures of people in adjacent fields and extract principles that can be applied to their own domain. The fifth element of becoming unstoppable is compound momentum maintenance. Champions understand that stopping and starting requires more energy than maintaining consistent forward movement. They develop the ability to maintain momentum even during periods when progress seems slow or when motivation is low. Compound momentum maintenance means having systems that keep you moving forward regardless of external circumstances or internal emotional states. Champions build habits and routines that continue operating automatically even when willpower is depleted or when life becomes chaotic. Champions also understand that momentum can be maintained at different intensities. During challenging periods they might reduce the intensity of their efforts, but they never stop completely. They understand that maintaining minimum viable momentum is easier than rebuilding momentum from zero. The most sophisticated momentum maintenance involves creating positive feedback loops where progress in one area automatically generates energy and motivation for progress in other areas. Champions design their lives so that winning becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The final element of becoming unstoppable is legacy consciousness. Champions understand that true success isn't just about personal achievement. It's about creating something that lasts beyond your individual performance. They become unstoppable because they're driven by purposes larger than themselves. Legacy consciousness means thinking about how your efforts contribute to something meaningful that will persist after you're gone. Champions consider how their work advances their field, improves their community, and creates opportunities for future generations. This broader perspective provides motivation that transcends personal circumstances and temporary setbacks. When you're working on something larger than yourself, personal difficulties become less significant and your capacity for persistent effort increases dramatically. Champions also understand that legacy is created through the people you influence and develop, not just the achievements you accumulate. The most powerful legacy is creating other champions who continue advancing the work after you're no longer able to continue. When you integrate all these elements, identity alignment, systematic value creation, antifragile adaptation, exponential learning, compound momentum maintenance, and legacy consciousness, you become truly unstoppable, not because you never face obstacles, but because you've developed the systematic capability to turn every obstacle into an opportunity for becoming stronger. This is how champions are made. This is how ordinary people transform themselves into extraordinary performers. This is how you win at everything you do. The framework is complete. The knowledge is yours.